Welcome, everybody. It's finally time to start the session. Thank you so much for your patience. Are you guys excited to be here at All Things Open? Yeah. Cool. So today we are going to be talking about APIs. And since Taylor Swift's concert movie was just released a few days ago, this is going to be Taylor's version of the talk. Any other Swifties out there? Yes. Yay. Okay, well, for those of you who are not Swifties, that's fine. Just think of this as a talk about APIs. Now, in honor of Taylor, I wanted to start things off with a song. So I asked generative AI to write a song for me about bad APIs. I'm going to share with you what it came up with. I did tweak it a little bit. I'm not at all a singer, so I'm just going to read it to you. And if you ever heard me sing, you would say, "Thank you, Lord, for just reading it." So here we go. We built an API, thought it was okay. Developers tried to use it, but it caused dismay. No version control, no docs to be found. We named things haphazardly, left them unrenowned. There's a pre-chorus. Developers called, we broke their code, status codes and errors we ignored. We rate limited them, didn't care at all. Our API was a disaster. We watched it fall. The chorus. Look what you made me do. Built an API that developers hate. Bad blood between us, they can't relate. Look what you made me do. Push changes whenever we felt like it. Now our API is a piece of... All right, second verse. We used offensive language, thought it was cool. Developers didn't think so, thought we were fools. We broke their promises, changed the API. Inconsistency killed them. We didn't even try. In honor of Taylor, there's a bridge. Now we know we messed up bad. Our API was the worst we've had. We'll version it, add some docs, name things consistently. No more mocks. Back to the chorus. Look what you made me do. Built an API that developers hate. Bad blood between us, they can't relate. Look what you made me do. Push changes whenever we felt like it. Now our API is a piece of... All right, before I go any further, I want to introduce myself. My name is Schaefer, and I'm a developer advocate at Grammarly. I'm thrilled to be back in Raleigh. I went to NC State, it's where I got my bachelor's and master's in computer science, and I actually started my career here at IBM, very close by. I went remote, but I was at IBM for about 8 years as a software engineer before moving into full-time dev advocacy at Sugar CRM and MongoDB, and now Grammarly. I would love to connect with you on social, so the QR code on the screen, as well as the link, gram.ly/Lauren_ATO. Both will take you to my link tree. I'd love to connect with you on Twitter or LinkedIn, and I also have a TikTok that I admittedly have not updated in a while. Now, you might be wondering, who is Ken Alger? Why is he there? Why is he not on the stage with me? Ken was originally supposed to be co-presenting here with me today, and unfortunately had a family issue come up, so he could not travel. But I want to give Ken a huge shout out, thank him for helping me build this presentation, and also he sends his love to all of you. Definitely wishes he was here. So let's get right into it. I'm going to be sharing with you a Taylor Swift fan site that I've been in the process of building. So this is a place where Swifties can come on to join, learn more about her tours, her concert films, and eventually more than that. Now, in order to get the information, the data that I'm going to put on the tours and the concert films pages, I'm going to be hitting a Taylor Swift API. Now, Ken and I built this API. It's not deployed anywhere, so we can hate on it all we want. It's not real. We can be the haters. It's fine. And since Ken's not here, we can just blame everything we hate on Ken. That seems fair. So, this is the Taylor Swift fan site. It is admittedly not very pretty. It could use a little design help, but this is not a talk about design. So if you're hating it, just calm down. It's fine. Move on. Go watch another talk about design. This site was built with Flask and Jinja templates, so you'll see a little bit of Python and a little bit of HTML later on. All right, so let's jump right in. I'm going to be starting out in VS Code, where I've installed the Postman extension. So Postman is going to allow me to make requests to the Taylor Swift API. So I'm going to start out with a GET request on the root of the API, and let's just send that request. And it works, thank goodness. Okay. So the first thing we're getting here is a list of endpoints, and it's saying, hey, there's a tours URL at /getAllTours. And that's it. That's the only endpoint I have to go on at this point. So I kind of hate this, right? When you're designing your API, you want to make it discoverable. Developers want to be able to navigate through all of your endpoints simply by using the information provided in the API responses. And that's going to be really challenging to do here. So let's try accessing this endpoint and see what happens. 404 not found. Let's blame Ken. Looks like there's a typo here, so let's fix that. All right, we've got a list of tours coming back here, so that's working, but I kind of had to work for it, which I kind of hate. So the first way to build an API that developers will hate is to keep your endpoints like a secret. At this point, I'm still not sure what else the API can do, since the response when I called the root endpoint only listed one endpoint, and I don't even know where the docs are. I don't even know if the docs exist. So when you build your API, you want to make it discoverable. There are great tools out there that will help you auto-generate docs, which is really nice, because they really take the pain out of maintenance. It's so easy to make a change to your API and then forget to update your docs. So auto-generators are great. All right, let's go back to that response, and I'm going to take a look at the headers that came back. We can see I just made this request. It was real. And deprecation is set to true. So this endpoint's been deprecated, and it looks like the link is pointing me to more information about the deprecation notice. So let's go try that out. Okay, there are docs here, yay. So it's saying this is the docs for GetAllTours. It says the GetAllTours endpoint returns a list of Taylor Swift's tours, but there is the deprecation notice here. So it says, this endpoint has been deprecated because only an idiot would use this naming scheme. Use API/v1/tours instead. And I heard some snickers over here, and I think we all kind of hate this, right? We don't want to be calling people idiots. I would be afraid to contribute to this API if people were going to publicly call me an idiot. So we want to be kind and inclusive. So the second way to build an API that developers will hate is to use your words like knives. When you're building an API, be sure that both your API and your docs use inclusive language. You don't want to cause harm or distract from your API by either intentionally or unintentionally using offensive language. There are fantastic guides online that provide guidance on language, or you can use a tool that will check for harmful language. Offensive language can range from something seemingly small, like consistently calling anonymous developers he, all the way up to racist hate speech, right? The impact can vary, but it all distracts. So I'm going to jump back to the deprecation notice, and let's actually try out the new API. So it says use API/v1/tours instead. All right. Let's take a look at our response body, and this is actually working. We're getting an array of objects where each object contains information about one tour. So we can see this first tour, we're getting the title, the tour ID. It started April 2009, it ended July 2020. The album associated with it is Fearless. There were 118 shows. We can see how many people attended. And then we've got a set list, which is an array of strings. Oh, same thing for the encore, an array of strings. So let's go back to my Taylor Swift fan site, and let's access the tours page. So I've already implemented this page, and what it's doing is calling that tours endpoint. And then if I click on more details, it's going to call another endpoint. Let's take a look at that. So if I do tours/5, we've got the tour ID here. Let's do a GET request. And that's going to give us information about a single tour. So that's what's happening here. This page is calling tours/whatever the ID number is. This looks pretty good. Let's take a look at another one. Let's look at Speak Now. looks pretty good. Go look at the Eras tour, her latest tour. And this is kind of a hot mess. I don't know if you can see, but instead of being a list of strings, it's a list of objects. So we've got a list of acts. So Taylor's latest tour, instead of being a single act, it's got 10 different eras in it, and the schema has changed. And I'm kind of annoyed with Ken here, right? Because why is the schema changing and I'm still in V1? This is gross. I hate this. So let me go update my app. Ken told me he wrote V2. So app.py is kind of the heart of my application. It's where I make my API calls and also where I route URLs that people hit when they access my application. So I'm going to change from V1 to V2, and let's see what happens. Not V21. Okay, this still looks pretty similar. Now let's go look at Fearless. All right, here we're getting the same sort of schema. So we've got an array. In this case, there's only one act, but it's the same schema. Let's take a look at Speak Now. Okay, same kind of schema. I was going to go through the effort of updating the code, but I know we're running way over, so I'm not going to sit here and update the code in front of you. But it's kind of frustrating that I had to update the code just for V1, right? So the third way to build an API that developers will hate is to push your latest changes to your API whenever you feel like it. It's your version. So it was super frustrating when I found that the Eras Tour concert data in V1 of the API had a different schema from the other tours. The change should have never made it into V1. So when you're building your API, you can use a system like semantic versioning to ensure that breaking changes only go into the major versions. So semantic versioning defines rules for major, minor, and patch releases. You probably only need to use the major version in your URL. And it's worth mentioning here, we handled the API versioning in the URL, but there are a couple different ways you can do it with headers or something else. So you've got options. It does not have to be in the URL. Now, building on the same idea of versioning, there is another thing I hate here, and that's that there was no notification system for the breaking changes. So the fourth way to build an API that developers will hate is developers call your API again, and you break it like a promise. I found it very irritating that the schema changed in V1 of the API without any warning, right? Ideally, I want a notification in the API itself, maybe also something coming to my email, maybe something in the documentation that's letting me know that breaking changes are coming. I also need time to adapt these changes. I want to guarantee that an older version is going to be available for some certain time period before a new version is released, or after a new version is released, right? We want time to adapt. I don't want V1 to disappear as soon as V2 is released. I also want a way to discover what's changed between versions, right? I was kind of doing a little bit of guesswork here, trying to figure out what had changed, what the new schema was. But ideally, that's going to show up in the changelog. We're going to know exactly what's changed. So I know what I need to update and what I need to test. All right, so let's take a look at the concert films page. And this is one I've been meaning to build out, and I thought we could build it out together here. So Ken told me he made a new API called a new API endpoint / movies that I'd be able to use here. So I'm going to go over to Postman, try that out. Remember, tours gave us our list of tours, so let's try movies. Okay, that didn't work. Let's try movie. Okay, that worked. So there's a small inconsistency there. We've got tours, which is plural, movie, which is singular. It's annoying. It's a small paper cut, but we can move on. I'm going to try to use this in my app. So I'm going to jump back to app.py. Remember, this is the heart of my app. It's handling all of my routing. And I've already got a function set up to handle when a user goes to the movies URL. So I'm going to make a call to the movies URL, or the movies API. And Copilot's nailing it. That's always nice. But look, even Copilot thinks it should be movies, and it's singular. We want to get that response data back, so I'm going to say movies equals response.json. That's great. And then I want to pass this response over to the template, which is the HTML page that's handling it. So I'm going to say movie info equals movies. I'm just going to jump back and make sure I didn't break anything. We're still good. OK, let's take a look at the movies template. And this is the HTML page that's displaying the data. And instead of coming soon, let's just dump that movie info out to the page. How are we looking here? OK, it's not pretty, but we've got it. We've got a list of movies here. So let's go ahead and attempt to make this pretty. And actually, if I think about it, this is going to be pretty similar to what I did on the tours page. So I'm going to copy the same formatting, same information, because I just want to iterate through that list of movies, just like we iterated through a list of tours. So copying that same code, I'm going to drop it in here. Anywhere I've got tour, I'm going to replace that with movie. So I'm going to say for every movie in movie info, we want to list the title. That's good. The movie ID would be really nice. So we'll say the movie number is movie.movieid. If you spot a typo, please shout it out. Associated album would be nice to know. The date the movie came out would be great. End date doesn't really make sense. Number of shows doesn't really make sense. I do want more details, but I'm going to fill that out later. So let's see how that goes. Go back to my concert films. Ugh. OK, so we've got the movie number getting displayed, but really nothing else. So let's go figure out what's going on here. Do you spot it? OK, so movie title has changed to movie name. There we go. We've got a nice movie name going out there. The movie number actually worked. How about the associated album is now related album. And the start date is now the release date. Let's see how this goes. OK, now we've got some data in here. So just some small annoyances there, some small paper cuts. Field names changed, even though they kind of meant the same thing. The last thing that's really bugging me about this is the date format. So I really like dates to be formatted pretty. I like them to be month, day, year. So I actually wrote a format date function that makes them pretty after they get the dates back from the API. So let's call that same function for the movies endpoint. So after we get the response back, I just want to loop through the movies. Oh, Copilot's on it, you guys. I love it. Does that look right? If the release date is in the movie, then we're going to format the date. Let's see what happens. No, didn't work. Value error, and that's saying that the time data 2011-1121 does not match that date format we're looking for of day, month, year. So what's happened here is that my format date function can't handle it. So the API has changed the date format, and what I need to do to fix this is really go back and update this format date function to handle two different date formats. It's doable, but it's just another paper cut in this process. I'm not going to take the time to do that now, so we'll just deal with the ugly dates for now. So, jumping ahead here. The fifth way to build an API that developers will hate is to name things as the mood strikes. Who cares if inconsistency causes death by 1,000 cuts? When I was working with the movies endpoint, I had lots of little paper cuts, right? The movies endpoint was movie singular, despite tours being plural. The namings of the fields in the response data didn't match the same fields in the tours API. And then the date formatting also did not match. And all of these are small paper cuts, right? If it's just one paper cut, a developer's probably going to get annoyed but continue on. But at some point, all of these paper cuts join together to create real frustration. And that's when developers are going to go look for a new API. So be consistent. All right, so the next step after getting this page working is I want to implement that more details link. So I'm going to go back to Postman. And just like we did earlier with the tours/ID number, I want to try that here. So let's take a look at movie number 6. That worked. That's got information about the Eras Tour movie just released on October 13th. Let's go take a look at movie number 2. And that's the Lorax. So I'm going to blame Ken for this one. Taylor Swift did actually appear in the Lorax, but it's not really a concert film, so it's a little weird it's here. I'm going to come back to that later. Let's take a look at one more. How about movie number 1? And I've reached a rate limiter. I've already run too many API requests. Kind of hate that, right? So 6th way to build an API that developers will hate is to rate limit whenever and however is convenient for you. It's fair that your API is not around. Now, there are many good reasons why you may want to use a rate limiter, right? You may want to prevent denial of service attacks, or you may want to keep your costs down, or maybe you have a subscription model where people on different tiers get access to a certain number of API calls in a time period. They're all valid reasons. But if you choose to use a rate limiter, be clear about what those rate limits are. Developers should not be surprised about your rate limits. They're probably relying on your API, and hitting an unexpected rate limit or an unexpected outage could really break their app. All right, so let's jump back to what I mentioned earlier about the Lorax. It really shouldn't be there. It's here in this list of movies. I'm actually going to try to delete it. Let's see if that works. So I'm going to change this get request to a delete, and I'm going to try to delete movie number 2. Oh, and it worked. It was successfully deleted. I've got a nice status code here giving me a 202. Let's go back and take a look at the list of movies now. And it's still here. So that's kind of frustrating. And I guess if I think about it, I haven't authorized, I probably shouldn't be able to have access to come in and edit this data, but I also should not have gotten a successfully deleted message, right? So the 7th and final way to build an API that developers will hate is don't blame me for only returning the data. Status codes lose all their meaning. Be sure your API uses status codes and uses them correctly. It is so much easier for developers to debug if they get into an issue, if they know if it's on their end or on yours. Status codes are important, and they should have meaning. All right, so we've been living in the negative here, 7 ways to make an API that developers will hate. Let's go ahead, flip to the positive. Let's talk about 7 ways to build an API that developers will love. So number 1, make your API discoverable. We talked about the value in making your endpoints discoverable purely through navigating responses from your API or by providing up-to-date documentation. Number 2, use inclusive language. Don't distract readers or cause harm by using offensive language. Be kind and use inclusive language. Number 3, version your API. When you make breaking changes to your API, create a new version. Number 4, create and follow a process for introducing breaking changes. If you introduce breaking changes, be sure to notify users so they have time to react. Be clear about what the breaking changes are. Put them in your change log. 5, be consistent with names and types. Small inconsistencies are like tiny paper cuts that can add up to create real frustration. Number 6, be clear about rate limits. If you choose to rate limit your API, be clear about what the limits are. Developers are probably relying on your API, and running into a rate limit or an unexpected outage could break their app. And finally, use status codes appropriately. When you do, it is so much easier for developers to debug if it's an issue on their end or on yours. Status codes are important, and they should have meaning. When we follow these principles, we'll get an API that developers will love. So last thing I want to do here is update the chorus from the song that I shared with you at the beginning. So look what we made it do. Built a good API that developers love. No bad blood between us, a push and a shove. Look what we made it do. Push changes with care when it was right. Now our API's a delight. I would love to know what you all thought about this session. Please fill out the session survey. Tell me what you liked, what could be improved. I would love the feedback. Again, I would love to connect with you on social, so you can use the QR code on the screen. And if you have any questions, you want to chat, say hi. I will be up here after the session. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the conference.